Don't come to the front door." My daughter-in-law's housekeeper whispered into the phone, "Please, Margaret, come around the back. And don't let anyone see you." I stood in my kitchen in Oakville, still holding my coffee mug, still wearing the blouse I'd ironed that morning specifically for this occasion. My son Daniel's engagement party, the one his fiancée Claire had been planning for 3 months, the one I had baked 24 butter tarts for, the ones Daniel had loved since he was 7 years old. "Ruth, what on earth are you talking about?" But she had already hung up. I set the mug down. I looked at the butter tarts cooling on the rack. I looked at the November light coming through my kitchen window, thin and gray the way it gets in Ontario when winter is deciding whether to arrive, and I felt something I hadn't felt since the morning my husband Gordon passed away 4 years ago. That specific cold that doesn't come from weather. I grabbed my coat anyway. Ruth had worked for Claire's family for 11 years. I had only met her once at a dinner Claire hosted in September. Once briefly at a fall market in Burlington, where she'd been buying squash and I'd been buying apples, and we'd spoken for maybe 4 minutes. She was a quiet woman in her 60s. Jamaican Canadian, with careful eyes and the kind of stillness that only comes from having seen a great deal and chosen to say very little of it. She had never called me before in her life. I drove the 20 minutes to Claire's house in Mississauga, telling myself there was a reasonable explanation. À surprise? Something went wrong with the catering. Maybe Claire wanted to rearrange the guest arrival order, and Ruth was simply relaying the message awkwardly. People panic about parties. I knew that. I had planned enough of them myself when Gordon was alive, and we used to host the whole neighborhood every Canada Day. Back when the yard was full and the house felt too small instead of the other way around, I turned onto Claire's street and parked half a block away the way Ruth had asked me to. I walked along the side of the property, past the cedar hedge, around to the back where the gate to the garden was standing slightly open. Ruth was waiting just inside it. She looked at me the way a person looks at someone they are about to deliver news to. Not unkind, but braced. "Thank you for coming this way," she said quietly. "Ruth, you're frightening me." "What is going on?" She glanced back toward the house. All the lights were on inside. I could see movement through the kitchen window. Caterers in white shirts moving back and forth. "There's a man here," she said. "He arrived this morning. He's been here since 10 o'clock. He and Claire have been in the study with the door closed." I waited. "He's been here before," Ruth said. "Twice in the past month. When Mr. Tabling, Daniel, was at work. I've seen him." I didn't think anything of it at first. Claire told me he was her financial advisor. "Maybe he is," I said. Though even as I said it, I felt that cold again. Ruth shook her head slowly. "Financial advisors don't cry." "Margaret." She was crying when she came out of that study the first time. And he held her face in his hands. I saw it through the door. I wasn't trying to see. I was bringing them tea. I stood there in the November garden with dead leaves on the ground around my feet, and I thought about my son Daniel, who was at this moment driving here from his office in downtown Toronto, probably stuck on the QEW. Probably listening to the hockey game on the radio. Probably happy. He had been so happy lately. That was the thing I kept returning to. For years after his father died, Daniel had carried a heaviness I couldn't reach. Gordon's death had hit him in a particular way. They had been close in the specific, quiet manner of fathers and sons who don't say much but build things together on weekends, who watch the same teams and share the same stubborn streak. Daniel had gone gray at the temples by the time he was 38. He'd worked too much and slept too little, and I had worried about him in the sustained, low-frequency way that never fully stops when you are a mother. And then he met Claire. She was bright and organized, and she laughed at his jokes, even the ones that weren't very funny. She had a good career, something in pharmaceutical sales. I never fully understood the details. She owned her house. She had a daughter from a previous relationship, a little girl named Sophie who was 6 years old and serious, and who had recently started calling Daniel, Danny, which made him light up in a way I hadn't seen in years. I had liked Claire. I want to be honest about that. I had genuinely liked her. Is he still here now? I asked Ruth. Yes. They moved to the living room about an hour ago. The caterers are using the kitchen, so they couldn't stay in the study. And Sophie, at her grandmother's, she won't be back until this evening. I asked Ruth to let me in through the back, and she hesitated for just a moment before she stepped aside. The kitchen smelled like warm pastry and the particular kind of organized chaos that catering companies bring with them. 2 young men were arranging charcuterie boards on the island. They didn't look up when I came in. Ruth led me through the hallway toward the front of the house. I heard voices before I saw them. Claire's voice first, low and urgent. Then a man's voice, older. I thought, or at least weathered. They were in the living room and the door was open, and I stopped just outside it in the hallway, in the shadow of the coat rack. And I stood very still. I want to tell you that I wrestled with it. That I hesitated at the idea of listening to a private conversation. And I did hesitate. For perhaps 30 seconds. Before I thought about Daniel stuck in traffic on the QEW. Happy. Driving toward his own engagement party. And then I stopped hesitating entirely. The man's name was Robert. I gathered that in the first 2 minutes, he and Claire spoke like people who know each other's sentences, who have had the same argument enough times to skip the middle section and go straight to the parts that matter. I can't keep doing this. Claire was saying, the timing is impossible. Robert, I need you to understand that. You keep saying timing. The man said, you've been saying timing for 2 years. Because it hasn't been right? And is it right now you're throwing an engagement party tonight? Claire, à silence. I know what I'm doing. She said, do you? Because from where I'm standing, you're about to marry a man while I'm still don't. While we're still Robert, I said don't. I pressed my back against the wall of the hallway, and I breathed very carefully, and I thought about nothing except continuing to breathe. I have a daughter. Claire said. Quieter now. She's 6 years old. I have a mortgage in this city, and my parents are in Brampton, and my whole life is here. And Daniel is a good man. I know he's a good man. He's going to be a good father to Sophie. And what am I? Robert said. The exhaustion in his voice was the worst part. It didn't sound like a fight. It sounded like the end of something. What have I been? Another silence. Longer. You know what you've been to me. Claire said softly. You know that. I walked back to the kitchen. I walked past the catering staff and out the back door, and through the garden gate, and back along the cedar hedge to the street. I sat in my car. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. I am 63 years old. I grew up in a small town outside of Guelph, and I moved to Oakville when Gordon got the job at the steel plant, and I raised 2 children, and I buried my husband, and I have had, across the course of my life, many moments where I had to decide what kind of person I was going to be in the next 60 seconds. This was one of them. My first instinct was to call Daniel. I reached for my phone and then I stopped. He was in traffic. He was happy. Whatever I said to him would land in the middle of the QEW with 45 minutes of driving still ahead of him. That was not how I was going to do this. My second instinct was to drive home and say nothing and tell myself it wasn't my business. I considered that one seriously. Claire was an adult. Whatever was between her and this Robert person was complicated in ways I didn't understand. Maybe it was truly over. Maybe she loved Daniel genuinely, and this was the last chapter of something that was already ending. But I kept thinking about Sophie. Because if this marriage went wrong, if Daniel married Claire and then found out about Robert 6 months from now or 2 years from now or on their 5th anniversary, it wouldn't just be Daniel who was hurt. It would be a little girl who had started calling my son Danny. A little girl who had lost one father figure already when her parents separated. A little girl who had, as far as I could tell, absolutely nothing to do with any of this and everything to lose from it. I thought about what Gordon would have said. Gordon was a plain-spoken man, not complicated about these things. He would have said, you either say something or you don't. Margaret, pick one and live with it. I went back inside. Ruth was standing in the kitchen doorway, and she saw my face, and she gave me the smallest nod. Like she'd known all along what I would decide. I walked into the living room. Claire was alone. Robert had gone. I hadn't heard him leave, but there was a second door at the far end of the room that led to the front hall, and he must have used it. Claire was standing at the window with her back to me. And when she heard me, she turned around, and the color left her face in one clean wave. Margaret. Hi. Sweetheart. I said. I was surprised by how steady my voice was. She looked at the hallway behind me. Looking for Ruth? Probably. Looking for an explanation of how I'd gotten in. How long I'd been there. How much I knew. Your housekeeper called me. I said. She was worried about you. And about Daniel. Claire sat down on the arm of the sofa. She looked suddenly very tired. Young and very tired. Which is a particular kind of exhaustion I remember from my own 30s. How long have you been here? She asked. Long enough? She looked down at her hands. On her left hand was the ring Daniel had given her, white gold with a small round diamond. Nothing flashy. Exactly what she'd asked for. She'd told me the story of how he proposed at their kitchen table over takeout curry because they'd been too tired to cook. And she'd cried telling me. I had believed her. I still believed her. In a way, I believed she felt something real. I just didn't believe it was the whole story. I wasn't going to, she started. Claire. I said gently. I'm not here to accuse you of anything. I'm here because my son is going to walk through that front door in about 20 minutes, and I need to know that you have made your decision. Fully. Without exceptions, standing in the living room. She flinched. I ended it today. She said. That was what you heard. That was me ending it. I know. I said. I heard that part too. She looked at me then. Really looked at me. And I saw the fear there, but also something else. Relief. Maybe. The way people sometimes look when the thing they've been managing alone for a long time is finally known by someone else. Are you going to tell him? She asked. I sat down in the armchair across from her. Outside, I could hear cars starting to arrive. Guests parking along the street. I'm going to tell you this. I said. Daniel is not an easy man to love. He closes down when he's hurting, and he works instead of talking, and he will drive you absolutely mad with how long he can go without saying what's wrong. I know that better than anyone. I raised him. Claire said nothing, but he is honest. I said. To a fault. He has never in his adult life done anything he was ashamed of. And he would rather know a hard truth on the worst day of his life than live for years inside a comfortable one that isn't real. She pressed her fingers against her eyes. You need to tell him. I said. Not me. You? Tonight. Before this party goes any further, you tell him about Robert. You tell him how long. You tell him everything. And then you let him decide. He'll call it off. She whispered. He might. I agreed. Or he might not. I don't know my son well enough to predict what he'll do with the truth. But I know what he'll do if he finds out later. And so do you. She was quiet for a long moment. "What about Sophie?" she asked. And her voice broke on the name. "Sophie will be fine," I said. And I believed it when I said it. Sophie has a mother who loves her, and she will be fine. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for, and less resilient than we need them to be. And the only thing that actually breaks them long term is watching the adults around them pretend that broken things are whole. I don't know where that came from. It came out of me like something I'd been waiting to say for a long time. Possibly since my own children were small. We sat together in the living room while the caterers worked in the kitchen, and the first guests began ringing the doorbell. Ruth answered the door each time with a quiet efficiency that suggested she had decided to give us as long as we needed. When we heard Daniel's voice in the front hall, his specific way of laughing at something, that short, surprised bark that Gordon used to do too, Claire stood up. She looked at me one more time. "I'm scared," she said. "I know," I said. "Do it anyway." I waited in the living room while she went to find him. I could hear the murmur of voices. Claire asking if they could speak privately for a few minutes. Daniel's easy agreement. The sound of a door closing somewhere toward the back of the house. I sat with my hands in my lap, and I looked at the engagement party, spread across the dining room table, the charcuterie boards, and the glasses of sparkling wine, and the small printed cards with Daniel and Claire's initials intertwined, and I thought about Gordon. The way I often do when something important is happening, and I need to feel less alone in it. 40 minutes passed. The guests arrived, and Ruth circulated with wine and made pleasant small talk with a skill that made me think she had done something like this before, covered for someone. Bought them time. Held a room together while the real conversation happened behind a closed door somewhere. When Daniel came back into the room, his face was the face of a man who has been told something true after a long time of not knowing it was being withheld. It was not a destroyed face. It was a recalibrating one. There is a difference. Though it can be hard to see from the outside, he found me immediately. Across the room, through the guests, he found me the way he'd been finding me his whole life, when something happened that he didn't know what to do with. He came over and sat down beside me. "How long did you know?" he asked. "About 3 hours," I said. "I wanted to make sure she was the one who told you." He nodded slowly. He picked up a glass of sparkling water from the table beside him and turned it in his hands. "She says it's been over for 3 weeks," he said. "I believe she means that." I said carefully, "Do you believe it's true?" I thought about the man in the living room saying, "You know what, you've been to me." I thought about the way Claire had said I ended it today and then corrected herself, and I thought about the fact that I was not 25 years old and I had not been born yesterday. I believe she wants it to be true. I said, "I think what she does with that wanting is going to tell you everything you need to know about who she is." Daniel looked at me for a long time. "You could have just called me," he said. "You were on the highway." I said, "And it wasn't mine to tell." He almost smiled. "Not quite. When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise." I said, "I'm 63, and I've been wrong about more things than I can count. I just loved your father for 31 years, and I know what it costs when the foundation of something is built around a silence." He put his arm around me then, the way he hadn't done since he was a teenager, and we sat together in the middle of the engagement party that was still somehow continuing around us. Guests eating and laughing and assuming everything was fine. Ruth gliding through the room with an expression of perfect, neutral serenity. I don't know what Daniel decided that night. He and Claire talked for a long time after the party ended, and the caterers left and the house went quiet. I drove home alone with my empty butter tart tin on the passenger seat and the November dark all around me. He called me the next morning. "We're going to take some time," he said. "Figure out what's real." "That sounds right," I said. Claire told Sophie that the party was just a party, that things are a bit complicated right now, but that everyone loves her. That's true. I said. That's all true. There was a pause on the line. The comfortable kind. The kind that had been between us since he was old enough to call me from somewhere and simply be present in the silence. Mom, he said. Yes. Thank you for going in the back door. I laughed. It surprised me. How easily it came. Thank Gordon. I said. He always said you either say something or you don't. I finally listened. I don't know how this story ends. I'm not sure stories like this have endings. Exactly, they have turning points. And what happens after turning points depends on the people who have to keep living past them. Daniel is a good man. Claire may yet be the right person for him. Sophie is 7 now, and she still sometimes calls him Danny when they see each other. Which they do. Because whatever is between her parents, the adults in this situation have managed to put her first, and I keep making butter tarts. I bring them when I'm invited, and sometimes when I'm not. I sit in kitchens and I listen to what people aren't saying, and sometimes I pick up the phone when a quiet woman calls from a back garden and asks me to come in through the side. Gordon would say I'm meddling. He'd say it while eating his 3rd butter tart. Which is how I always knew he didn't really mean it. To anyone listening to this story, I want you to remember this. The kindest thing you can do for the people you love is not to protect them from the truth. It's to make sure they have the chance to hear it from the right person at the right moment, before it becomes the kind of secret that poisons everything around it. I'm 63 years old. I have made every mistake available to a person in that time, but I have never regretted walking in through a back door. Thank you for listening. If this story reached you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it today.